Hello, world!
It's been nearly a year since the last One Piece Saga transmission. Don't keep them waiting with your dumb goofs.
Wrong. It's barely been a couple of weeks since the last One Piece chapter.
Doesn't count, it's not the main channel.
Settle down, we're already live. Let's give the viewers a couple of minutes to tune in.
A couple of minutes in 2024, you'll lose all of your retention.
Yeah, he's right about that. You're already dragging this out, and it's not even funny.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. Hello and welcome back to the One Piece Saga, the long tale of me watching One Piece for the very first time, ranking each arc in a tier list, and now being fully caught up with the manga, yapping about it every single week. For some very quick housekeeping, the ending of Wano and the introduction to Egghead was a bit blurry, so there are some things that I've already talked about in the previous episode, but there's also a ton of stuff going on in the wider world that we'll talk about today. Also, because I'm now caught up and have spent infinitely more time on every single story beat than I did when I was getting caught up, the areas I choose to focus on will definitely be a little bit different because, oh my god, I've spent like 500 hours just shooting out random theories. All that being said, this is a gargantuan arc, so without further ado, let us dive right in. Because it has been far too long, let us catch up with our good buddy, the Z-ha-ha-ha-ha man himself, Blackbeard. And on a similarly nostalgic note, prep your tinfoil because it is time we lock in. With the warlord system now abolished, Koby and the Marine Fleet encircle Amazon Lily, bringing along the new and massively improved versions of the pacifistas, the Seraphim. Being the opportunist that he is, Blackbeard along with this grand fleet of rafts, I guess? But yeah, he shows up hoping to yoink Boa's devil fruit among all the chaos, which I'm not even sure how that would work, because you know, Boa's fruit is based on physical attraction, which Blackbeard, yeah actually you know what, let's not worry about that. The old Z-ha-ha-ha-ha man gets reverse uno'd by the absurdly OP Seraphim, and then Rayleigh on top of that, but he does end up getting Koby as a hostage. That is cool and all, and it's also definitely very intriguing that he chose to pursue Boa's fruits, but what I think is infinitely more important here is the Chekhov's gun that are the Seraphims. First off, with all the Kuma stuff and all the Boa Seraphim stuff we'd see later in the arc, I am almost certain that eventually they will essentially completely break free of that control hierarchy as a whole and develop their own personalities. I think the most obvious guess is Luffy liberating them since, you know, God of Liberation and all that, but I am still unsure how exactly they will flip. And I say flip very specifically because I do think they will flip and help us. Hold that thought for just a second. The Seraphim as a whole are definitely one of those things that are just rattling around in my brain as this kind of odd force. Especially with how many other offensive forces already exist and even new ones that would be introduced in this arc. Like, at this point in the story, just a very quick list of major powers at play. We have the God Knights, we have all the Elders who are obviously also fighters, then we have Emu who seemingly is also a fighter, we have the Marines which is another extension of the world government, but there also seems to be admirals that are sort of flipping on them. On top of that we have all the Seraphim and all the pacifistas now. Moving on to the other side, we have the general public and how they support the world government or don't support the world government. We have the revolutionaries who are actively working against the world government. We have all the pirates and their corresponding fleets, and then we have all of their associated allies in entire kingdoms. So yeah, in terms of like big hitting forces, there are so many at this point that I don't know where the Seraphims fall. Actually, I think I do. I have a theory. That's why I'm doing this whole preamble. I think their single most important trait has to be the fact that they are Lunarians, something that was a massive reveal with King, but was never really elaborated on in Wano. We know that they once lived atop the Red Line and were, presumably, hunted down by the world government, eventually taking over. The white hair and ability to create fire has some weird links to Luffy, but Lunarian, as in lunar, as in the moon, more so seems to point to Blackbeard who never sleeps, but also Enel is on the moon with a whole bunch of weirdness, so yeah, I don't really know. As of now, the Seraphim are the forces of the world government, but the world government is also their natural enemy since, you know, their home was replaced by Morijois. And even more than that, I think the God Knights being introduced in this very arc is another point to prove that the world government's army won't include neither the pacifistas nor the Seraphim. I think their army will only be the God Knights and the 5 Elders. Essentially what I'm trying to say here is that as of right now, both as Lunarians as well as forces of the world government, I think their role is kinda undefined. But in the long run, I can absolutely see them breaking free of all external control and essentially restarting the Lunarian civilization atop the Red Line. Considering all the King and Joy Boy stuff we see in the Kaido flashback, and considering some of the Nika liberation stuff we'd see in this arc, I can even see King guiding this new version of their civilization, but okay, that's a whole separate tangent. Looping back to what I actually wanted to talk about here, Blackbeard even learning of their existence. If you were following along with my weekly chapter readings, you will have heard my Blackbeard Egghead conspiracy 100 times already. I was unfortunately wrong there. But I absolutely think that the Seraphim, as of the end of Egghead, is a sleeper army for Blackbeard. With Devon copying Saturn, who has now been disenchanted, I think the Blackbeard pirates, using the form of Saturn, will yoink the Seraphim forces and completely turn the tide of battle. I expected that, and was wrong about that happening during the climax of Egghead, but to me, it just seems inevitable. There was so much focus on the control hierarchy of the Seraphim, and now that they've copied one of the Elders who is at the very top of that hierarchy, I just can't see it being just a random thing. It feels like a Chekhov's gun. Their entire deployment on Amazon Lily, that just seems like exposition, and I think Blackbeard being there to, again, just learn of it is the actual purpose of all those scenes. And you know what would be particularly spicy? If that Chekhov's gun was a power that very neatly synergized with Blackbeard's existing black hole power. And you know what would be even spicier? If the Seraphim just so happened to be modeled after existing warlords and replicated Parametheus. And you know what would be the spiciest thing of all? If there was a warlord with a confirmed Paramethea who sucked up a bunch of shadows to infuse himself with ludicrous power who also looks like a shallot. Yes, I am talking about Moria. I half expected Moria's fruit to already have been stolen by Blackbeard because, you know, Black Hole Shadows Asgard would annihilate, like, literally everything and everyone, but having an army where that is just one of the abilities definitely seems even better. So to wrap all of this up, I do think there'll come a point where Blackbeard, or the Blackbeard Pirates, uses their copied Saturn form to essentially yoink all of them and turn them into an army against the world government, or maybe Luffy. I have entertained the idea that maybe his goal is rather to infiltrate Marie Joie, but like, big picture-wise, I sort of can't see that happening with Blackbeard. I think that's more so a revolutionary thing. But maybe both of those things can be true at the same time, and Blackbeard's attack on Marie Joie involves a sleeper army. And at the same time, I do think there'll be someone like Luffy, or again, maybe even King himself, who tells them that your entire programming, it's not real. And at that point, they'll sort of restart the Lunarian civilization, because, you know, King is kind of the only dude. Not really a good look if Zoro fought the only one of them remaining and he kind of dies. I think that'd be kind of sad. Before we get into Egghead proper, I want to go on another slight tangent to talk about something that has been really rattling around my brain for all of Egghead, really. You know all the memes about One Piece ending in 5 years, but that happened 10 years ago. A lot of people just laugh at it and either assume that he just got more ideas, or maybe the way he sort of envisioned the story playing out just happened much faster than it actually did. Personally though, I think that has some truth to it, but really, I think there is one much more serious underlying reason for that. Many of you will have probably heard that originally, Sabaody didn't even have the worst generation. The arc was, apparently, too boring, and so Oda just wrote in an entirely new cast of characters. And what I want to illustrate with that is that the complexity of the story did not increase in a linear fashion, it was exponential. Think about the worst generation and the role they have played in all of post-time skip. Think about Law's role, think about Kid's role, think about Bonnie's role. These small changes cascade into massive changes later on. It is essentially the butterfly effect. I think for us as the readers, that has proven to be very good. Oda doesn't really seem to follow like a strict outline that he has set out for himself and never deviates from it. No, he seems to be much more of a Gardner type writer where if an idea comes to mind and it makes sense, he will write a new story and just see how all of those pieces play out. Again, for us, that has probably meant hundreds and hundreds of new chapters. But then, I started reading Egghead and there is another Gardner writer who still hasn't finished The Winds of Winter. Think about it this way, pre-timeskip Marineford, essentially the climax to the entire first act of the story was set up through like a handful of Meanwhile in the World scenes. Really, we barely knew Whitebeard and Ace 2 was around for just a single arc. If you think about the number of moving pieces that we were aware of and were actually being followed through in the story, it really wasn't that many. It was Luffy, Blackbeard, and Whitebeard's alliance. That's about it. And then let us look at post-time skip. There is essentially a single inciting event. We meet Law and figure out that, you know what, we're gonna take down Kaido. But unlike Marineford, which really begins to heat up only in the last stages of the saga, In the post-time skip era, absolutely everything leading up to that point is in some way directly connected to Kaido. Even things that seem kinda disconnected, like meeting Zunisha or Sanji's entire story in Whole Cake, also turn out to play a massive role in the eventual climax. You might be asking, why am I even rambling on about this? That makes perfect sense. That is what a good writer should do, you know, write all these stories and that they sort of all come together, you know? Which is, yes, you're absolutely right. Big thumbs up, Oda. Excellent storytelling. But, the thing I'm getting at is that this story that started with the idea of taking down Kaido to taking down Kaido took, about 10 years, give or take. And keep in mind that the Warlords initially didn't even exist in the manga either. It was supposed to be a story about just the Emperors. And then when we get to the Final Saga, we already have multiple armies. We have so many moving pieces that Egghead, I mean, it's kind of hard to call Egghead just because of how many other events there are at the same time. When talking about the Rocky Port incident, for example, Oda already noted that it would just take too long to draw, and so he just explained what happened. And don't forget that there are also entirely external forces, like the Cross Guild. Weevil is still somewhere doing something, Shiki is also a character that we know for sure exists and is doing something, but the story at this point is so incredibly complex, and there are so many moving pieces that all bounce off of each other, that I am honestly growing very scared that One Piece might genuinely never end. This is not even a matter of how long a single arc takes or whether or not we're going to get another Wano. This is about the fact that a single character doing one big thing must somehow interact with the hundreds of characters that are currently at play. Okay, but I'm gonna be real with you, Egghead was one of my favorite arcs because of that fact, so I might be worried, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm having a really good time. There are so many things happening in the world, honestly, I love it. I just really hope that, you know, it's not a George R.R. Martin situation, because, yeah. No, but I do genuinely wonder if some of the more prolonged breaks we've seen recently, is Oda really sitting down, thinking of a new idea, and then thinking how this new idea will fit into everything he already had planned, and maybe he has to rewrite entire sections that happen only in like 50 chapters. That's my headcanon, because when people told me that the Warlords weren't supposed to exist and the Worst Generation wasn't supposed to exist, I just sit there and sort of think to myself, that's not even One Piece. What do you mean they weren't supposed to exist? That's like most of the story. What do you mean they were not supposed to be there? What was supposed to be there? Anyway, that's a whole separate tangent, let's get back to the story. But only kind of, because there are more mysteries. Another thing we need to talk about is the supposed burn scar man, or the man with the burn scar, or the man marked by flame, or call it whatever. This is the dude who, supposedly, has the road poneglyph that was once on Fishman Island. But now, he sails around in a all-black ship and destroys anyone who nears him with weird whirlpools. Obviously, that is of massive importance because, that is the final poneglyph. What we currently know is that Law, Kid, and supposedly at least some of the Blackbeard pirates are aware of what is going on around him, but still, his location is obviously unknown. Importantly though, it seems like none of the Straw Hats, including Robin, know of who that is. And another important piece of speculation comes from Shiryu, who said that he might work for the world government, as in he's just moving around, destroying everyone, and essentially working as the final gatekeeper for Laugh Tale. As of now, that is all we know for sure, which obviously means that it is time for theories. And let's be honest, there's no intrigue here. I think most of us think that it's Dragon. It's not accurate in the anime, but that doesn't really matter much because in the manga, his ship is totally black. It almost seems to be coated in hockey. The mark by flame thing could rather be a statue, or I guess scorch mark. As for the weird whirlpools, I mean, Dragon has been doing weird whirlpools and weird weather shenanigans every single time we've seen him. In Logtown, there was a mysterious storm, almost as if someone was manipulating the wind and the weather patterns. And then in post-war, with the whole Grey Terminal thing, there was also a mysterious whirlpool of air. So yes, considering that we've seen just how weird weather patterns can be on the Grand Line, if someone were to control the currents, well, they could maybe create entire whirlpools like this. And finally, even Shiryu's speculation about them potentially working for the world government and trying to keep pirates at bay, I think also worked to support this idea in two different ways. Number one, yes, he isn't a pirate, so he doesn't really do piratey things. Shiryu supposes that it could be because he's a part of the world government, but really, I think it's because the revolutionaries are a completely external force. Which very nicely feeds into number two. I think the reason why he wants to keep everyone at bay and wants to make sure that no one gets the poneglyph is because he wants to be the final gatekeeper for the One Piece. For the sake of carrying out their entire, now multi-decade plan, they don't want someone to suddenly get to the One Piece and amass all that power. And so, instead of really trying to fight anyone, they just sail around with the key. So yes, I do think that there are a ton of things that just point right to Dragon. But at the same time, and this is really where it all falls apart, it doesn't really line up with what Robin should know and does know post-timeskip. Keep in mind that she has spent much more time with the revolutionaries than she has spent with Luffy. But when they talk about the last poneglyph, she has no idea where to look. But at the same time, based on the things we've seen Dragon do and react to, I think it is also plausible that the final poneglyph is a secret that wasn't even told to Robin. If it really is the final key to becoming the king of the pirates and essentially turning the world upside down, I can totally see Dragon holding onto that piece of information and never talking about it to essentially anyone, most of all Luffy, who is basically poised to become the next pirate king. Okay, now that we've gotten all the stuff that actually makes sense out of the way, of course, my personal wishes, and yes, I know you expected this, Davy D. Jones. In case you've forgotten about that, remember Long Green Longland, the arc that, especially in retrospect, seems very inconsequential, except for the fact that it introduces the Davy backfight, aka Davy Jones. No, this is not me overanalyzing, and no, it's not a nod to the Devil Fruits, it is an actual character Oda is going to introduce. The anime versions of the ship is straight up Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean. I will never let this go. Also, Long Green Longland is shaped like a crown that has just been filled up with water, so if you hid the final piece there, well, wouldn't you know it, you would become the Pirate King, aka you would wear the crown. That's where Davy D. Jones is, and that's where the One Piece is. Yes. Okay, but seriously, all jokes aside, think about it this way. Roger never had a devil fruit. He is the Pirate King, right? And Shanks also never had a devil fruit. People think there might be something to it. Well, what if that is because the final road poneglyph is held by Davy D. Jones and is at the bottom of the ocean? Maybe the reason why no one has ever reached Laugh-Tale after Roger is because most people equate devil fruits to power. Problem is, that's not really the case against Davy D. Jones, so even if you got all three, you could never make it to Laugh-Tale because, well, you're just going to drown. So, the question that arises is, how is Luffy going to deal with that? I want you to know that I'm only half joking about this. And I also want you to know that I unironically think that the One Piece could be a drain. I think there is a hole going through the planet that was once filled with water. I am not going to elaborate on that. I will, however, say that emo blasting is creating weird displacements in water. Think about that. I also have an unhinged theory about how it might be someone from Shanks' crew and that Shanks is dangling the final poneglyph as a carrot on a stick for the elders, but okay, let's not get into that. And I also think that the man marked by flames could be Shanks because his hair is marked by flames, because it's red. Because I am the G-Man and exist outside of time, I don't remember exactly where we left off in the main series, but you might remember that I was not the biggest Buggy fan. I thought all the jokes around him were just overdone. His whole failing upward gag was funny at first, but then I thought it was just played out and it was kinda predictable, and generally, I was just not vibing with him. That was until chapter 1082. We see our now, I want to say third flashback to Buggy and Shanks in the Roger days, or in this case, post-Roger days, I guess. But most of all, this flashback, much like we see in Wano, isn't about the rivalry or anything like that. This flashback shows us that, once Roger was out of the picture, Buggy truly believed in Shanks. He wanted him to be Roger's successor. Shanks was Roger's quote-unquote son. He bore his quote-unquote crown, and now we see that he is the only one bearing his quote-unquote sword with him replicating Divine Departure. In Buggy's eyes, Shanks was the only one who was worthy of Roger's title. Unlike the Buggy we see in the present day, who is constantly annoyed with Shanks, this Buggy cheered him on. He never wanted any of that power or status for himself. All he wanted was for Shanks to live up to their captain's legacy and for Buggy to just be by his side. But Shanks failed that trust. Presumably, he knew that it's not his time to rule, and that he is merely holding onto the crown until Joy Boy returns. But in doing that, I think he also completely shattered Buggy's perspective on him, because it seems like he doesn't want to carry on that legacy, like he doesn't respect it. Despite Buggy being the most annoying loudmouth in the series, we see that their entire conflict is just because Shanks saddened him, he disappointed him. Even though Shanks did invite him to join his crew, I think Buggy just said things he didn't really mean, and things that he still hasn't really come to terms with. And so, in the present day, we see that massive fissure between them, it is still there. Shanks largely treats Buggy the same as he always has, because 1, he doesn't really know how much he hurt him, but also 2, I think in a weird way, he is also proud of just how far Buggy has come on his own. I mean, he's an emperor now. Just like with Luffy, they are quote-unquote enemies on the open seas, but clearly, he doesn't really think there is any bad blood between them. For Buggy, on the other hand, seeing Shanks give away the Straw Hats and seemingly do whatever nonsense he's doing now just seems like rubbing the salt further into the wound, as if he never aspired to be like their legendary captain. Even looking back at the chapter now, I still ask myself, have we ever even seen a story like this? A story where it's not Buggy's dream being crushed because it's Buggy's dream, but rather his dream was crushed because he put his faith in someone else. I do think you could make a case that it is very similar to Zoro, and I've done a video on that, because I also think that Zoro's entire role is sort of hinged on what happens to everyone else and not so much himself. The death of Kuina is about the death of her dream, and not really Zoro's, but it still colors everything Zoro does. Ditto for Zoro losing at the hands of Mihawk. That was him losing, but that was more so disappointing his captain. And we see something very similar in Wano again. When Zoro is fighting King, it is all about, I made a promise to my captain. So I do think you could make a case that there are similar stories to this, but reading Buggy's story for the first time and uncovering that actual pain underneath all of it, I'm not gonna lie, I love Buggy. I feel so bad for him. I really, really wish that he had someone that he could just trust, because it does feel like Buggy is always a laughingstock, and I feel guilty myself because I did sort of put him in the same box, you know. But now learning that he did put all of his faith in Shanks, and Shanks just did things that Buggy either didn't understand or didn't care enough to learn, it's sad, it's disappointing. I did not trust Oda to ever make Buggy compelling for me personally, but he more than delivered. This single chapter recontextualized so much of his story and so much of my perspective on him that I genuinely think Buggy will be the next king of the pirates. I think Luffy will obviously also make it to Laugh Tale, and I do think that he might even be the first, but I think the fame will go to Buggy. Yes, I'm being 100% serious. I want Buggy to be the next king of the pirates, and Luffy will probably do the same thing, but he's just not going to get the title. It's no big deal, Luffy doesn't really care about it. Buggy, though, that would mean the world for Buggy. And this sort of leads me onto another talking point that I think needs to be acknowledged with this arc. Egghead, more than, I want to say, any other arc, does so much recontextualization of so many past events, and this is not exclusive to Buggy, it is also happening with Bonnie and Kuma. So many of the things we thought we knew are completely recontextualized from just a different perspective, and suddenly, those villains, they become tragic heroes. I don't want to say Buggy is quite a tragic hero because, you know, he is still kind of obnoxious, but I can see how he got there. For Kuma, on the other hand, we'll talk about Kuma. But yes, to tell the story that has spanned over 20 years and suddenly flip even someone like me, a dedicated Buggy hater, I don't know how Oda did it. This is cinema. Finally, moving closer to Egghead, another thing that we need to talk about, but I also won't really talk about because that would be literally this entire video, the animation for even just this introductory bit that we've already seen is downright insane. The Wano animation basically set a gold standard for what I would grow to expect from One Piece, but then when we got to Egghead and the style switched up completely, which by the way, I was right about that, and yes, I am kinda sad about that, but it just works so well. Specifically with Gear 5, I think some of the sort of simplified line art just makes sense in this weird way. It's like using the visual medium itself to accentuate what the story is trying to tell you, in the same way that we saw with Wano essentially being like this Edo period Japan. Also, Chopper and Robin are once again like the cutest duo of all time, I love them so much. We then meet up with Bonnie, who is chilling in a weird sea current, and in hindsight, this is of course also confirming that she is in fact a kid, since, you know, the sea turns off devil fruits and she is in kid form, aka this is her natural form. So at this point in the post-timeskip story, we have collected every single Infinity Stone of the worst generation, except the Mad Monk. I still have no idea what Oda is doing with him because we have literally not seen him do like a single thing, so maybe we're gonna see him in the final war? I don't know, we've literally touched base with everyone except him. Even setup-wise, we've seen stuff with Bonnie for quite some time now, so this sort of seems like the climax of our arc. But what about the Mad Monk? He does have a tattoo that kind of looks like flames, but no, I don't think that's what Oda's doing. As far as landing on Egghead and all of that goes though, I do think there is one thing that a lot of you will be mad at me for, but I really do not like this island. Yes, it is a winter island, I love winter islands, but I really just don't like the laboratory setting. It is infinitely better than like Punk Hazard, where it was just gray hallways and it was really boring, but still, I'm not a fan of these laboratory settings, and I wish we got to see something a little bit more out there, even though this arc, I know it was out there, is just a weird thing with me. I loved everything about the stuff that happened on Egghead, but I didn't like Egghead itself. I wish we got more weird science shenanigans, and maybe then I would have thought that it was worth it, but based on how it played out, I wasn't a huge fan. Spoilers, that's my biggest problem with this entire arc. Just the island itself. If this happened on like Sabaody, I think this would be my favorite arc of all time. That's a lie actually, for reasons we'll get to, but spoilers. One thing that was very interesting about landing on Egghead though, was Emet, who was obviously a massive Chekhov's gun. Again, I did sort of anticipate him to pop up a little bit earlier, but I was still right about him being the ultimate thing that sort of blows up this entire arc. We'll talk about him later though. Also, I think this marks time 3,455 of Oda writing something in and then sort of wrapping that story up in 1,000 chapters, because we finally get to hear what Hachinosu was yapping about when he was talking about Bonnie escaping and then his blood running cold. Even at the start of this arc, it was clear that there is a lot more lore with her and Vegapunk, the world government, etc, etc. I think the way we were introduced to all of that, with her initially chasing around Vegapunk and whatnot, is very much in line with this arc, sort of recontextualizing a lot of the things we thought we knew. So, big thumbs up for that, very thematically consistent, and I mean, I loved Bonnie's story in this arc, so we'll talk about that more. One thing in this very early section of Egghead that I was very mixed on though, is the whole Among Us investigation. When this arc began, the one thing I always kept stressing is that Vegapunk on his own home turf should be next to invulnerable. Every single advancement we've heard in the series has come from Vegapunk and Vegapunk alone. So if you wanted to siege his own home turf where he is armored with a bunch of robots and whatnot, I don't really buy that happening. And I thought the same thing about all of his satellites. If he really is supposed to be this mega brain anticipating basically all outcomes, I never really bought this kind of Among Us thing even happening. And that's the thing, in the end, I was right about that. There was a Death Note-esque twist, and Vegapunk was behind all of it. All of it was anticipated and all of it was planned, so big thumbs up. But now looking back, and even reading week to week, while it was kind of fun following along with the mystery, I think it just went on for a little bit too long, especially with just how many active moving pieces there were in the arc. And another weird oddity with the satellites is that it's sort of impossible, for me at least, to fully wrap my head around how exactly they're meant to behave. They're supposed to be these extracted personality traits of Vegapunk himself. But it's not like they're only that personality trait. And that is doubly more complex because not all personality traits are even strong within Vegapunk. So when I look at a character like Lilith, who is supposed to be evil, and she's not really evil, my brain does kind of short-circuit a little. It's sort of like their behavior is independent, but at the same time, all of their thoughts and thought process should be shared, but at the same time, they also embody different aspects, and so York can be the traitor and it makes perfect sense, but they should also share information, so how does that work from a traitor angle? Well, it doesn't, because Vegapunk foresaw all of that. It's really weird to follow along with, but the end result makes sense. It's just following it, and now looking back at it, it does just feel a little bit too played out, especially because, again, it wasn't even the real focus of the arc. And that is even more true because the death of Vegapunks doesn't really change anything. When the satellites die, they don't really die. Again, it makes perfect sense, they're robots, of course they don't die. But when their death is supposed to be a big plot twist, it's kinda like, why is it there? Anyway, that's enough Egghead for now. Yes, I know we're like 30 minutes into the video, but that's the Egghead arc. It's not really about Egghead, but it also kind of is. We then cut on over to Blackbeard versus Law. I mean, the fight was awesome, and yes, we talked plenty about Blackbeard suddenly showing up and saying room, and that it would be very funny, but I don't think Law is supposed to be someone we should be keeping an eye on as a potential death. I think Law will live on for quite some time. One thing that is very interesting here, though, is Chopper's hard drugs helping out. And I don't say that just because it's ha-ha funny, because pre-time skip was so important with Chopper's Rumble Balls and his monster form. Post-time skip, that hasn't really been a thing we've entertained, like, at all. So, the question that pops up for me is, what if Chopper takes a few of them? Or, what if Luffy takes a few of them? He is a Zone Fruit now. At the same time though, as much as I talk about Luffy popping a few of the Rumble Balls, one of my biggest fears with Gear 5 is that it feels like it's popped 1,000 of those Rumble Balls. It is already outside of all bounds and ignoring all rules. So maybe not Luffy, but just Chopper. I want to see Chopper do something really cool again. Please, Oda. Please. But in terms of the outcome of this fight, I think it's just going to be another case of, oh, so you not only hunted down my brother, and not only did a bunch of weird things in Marineford, you also went after the dude that kinda saved my life, so I'm going to hate you even more. As for Law though, I do think this is Oda telling us that he is out of the running for the One Piece, but his story is not done. He is of the D name, and his middle name of Water is yet another mystery that has not been explored at all. I know a lot of people are also still talking about the immortality surgery, but I think now that we've seen that with the Elders, that's not really supposed to be the focus, at least not in my mind. Now that we've seen the Sapphire Scale disease with Lily and Ginny, the Amberlet disease also seems a lot more mysterious in hindsight. There are links between sapphires and the planet Saturn, and in the story, we see that play out. So, applying the same kind of thinking, topazes are associated with Jupiter. So, amber lead and topaz, they're supposed to be orange, but amber lead's not orange, so I don't know, but maybe there is some kind of connection with Jupiter? Probably not. I don't really see Oda doing a very similar story with Law, just like he did with Bonnie, but at the same time, their powers are very similar, so maybe by using their sort of devil abilities, they bring this plague upon the world. I don't know, whatever the case, absolutely Law's story is not done. You know a story I think could actually be done, and if you listen very carefully, you might even hear their tears. It's Captain Kidd. I'm gonna be honest with you, I think this is one of the funniest fights in all of One Piece, and I know that a lot of Kid fans are very angry about that, and they say, Luffy does the same thing, why don't people clown on him? And the answer is actually very simple. It's because it's Luffy. It really is that simple. Kid is cringe. Luffy is cool. Very simple. But yes, the fact that this dude got this tiny taste of victory against Big Mom, and now he thinks he's going to take on Shanks, and as soon as he tries doing something, he's just obliterated. I don't know what this man was thinking. Why would you sail up to Elbaf, the island that has been known to be the most resilient, and you know that they're also allied with Shanks? Why would you do that? I think Kid just really needs to learn to pick his battles, because let's say, hypothetically, Kid is 5 times more powerful than Shanks. He could take him down, hypothetically. Why would you do that on his home turf with the world's most powerful military that not even the world government could bring in line? Who do you think you are, my man? It's so funny though, Shanks read the spoilers and was like, nah, we're not living in this timeline, let's shut down this cringe boy. Okay, all jokes aside, while I am much more inclined to say that Kid's story, unlike Law's, which is sort of implied to be continuing, is done, I also think that some of my tinfoil theories about his magnetism power might actually be important. I guess it's never been explicitly confirmed, but we've seen plenty of times how powerful fruit users can completely terraform entire islands. So what if a long time ago, there was a person with Kid's Devil Fruit ability, and his awakening completely messed up compasses on the Grand Line? I guess that doesn't really have to involve Kid necessarily, but I also think that there might be a thing where we're trying to maneuver through islands and Kid's power could prove useful because he can somehow manipulate the sort of magnetic waves. I am very much guessing, and this could be a case of Oda actually writing Kid out, because he does say that he was completely decimated, unlike Law, who was just defeated, but I don't know, maybe. So, you might be noticing by how dark it is in my room, but I'm sort of starting to realize that the Egghead video is not about Egghead because we have another cutaway, this time to King Cobra, the Reverie, and all that. So, yeah. Essentially, we see King Cobra being an absolute Giga Chad and going to talk to the Elders, most likely knowing full well that he's not going to make it out. And the biggest thing here is of course the reveal of Nefertari D. Lily. I think a pretty common consensus here is that she might have been the one to physically scatter the poneglyphs with the pawpaw fruits. But there is still the somewhat obvious question of what exactly happened for this entire split in the world government to happen in the first place. Considering Saturn, and I suspect the rest of the 5 Elders as well, have had the immortality surgery, Emu probably has also had it, and he might be around ever since the Void Century, and he might have known Lily personally. So the question arises of what kind of beef he might have had with Lily specifically, and now we know that he has beef with Vivi specifically. Personally, I think it would be very funny if they were like supposed to get married or something and Lily just dumped him. Okay, jokes aside, there is a little bit more lore. Back in Sabaody, and we're reminded of that here, we learned that there were 20 kingdoms who were used to found the world government. But obviously, we now see that Alabasta was not one of them, and so there should be 19. And that's also exactly what we see with the throne. There are 19 swords instead of 20. And to make matters more complicated, there is another sword in Emu's little garden. So, hypothetically, if that was the 20th sword, could this, memes aside, actually be a dispute among family lines? Could that sword actually be the Alabasta Kingdom sword that was never pledged but Emu wanted to pledge it? Alternatively, considering Alabasta was the only kingdom who didn't really want to join up with them, it could also be as simple as Emu just considering them enemies because, well, they sort of made the whole thing fall apart. Whatever the case, if the Void Century flashback is actual Game of Thrones, and Lily decides to join up with Joy Boy, who doesn't really like all of these monarchies and stuff, sign me up, I think it would go so hard. Really though, I think there is another angle that we must be completely missing here. Realistically, had Lily pledged her support and the world government were to be created, that would be pretty lasting peace since, you know, all the kingdoms would be united. It's not exactly great because, you know, monarchies and stuff, but we know that there was a big war. Creating this peace would probably be a smart call. But even so, Lily completely refused that. So I am more inclined to believe that there might be a dark secret with the world government, some of which are pretty obvious, you know, they're immortal and they're doing weird demon summoning circles and bringing things up from the underworld. There is shady stuff going on. So I think Lily just said, no, you know what, I'm out, and I do think it might have something to do with killing all devil fruits. More on that in just a second. And I also think Amazon Lily is a little bit sus, because what if it's Amazon of Lily? Hi, it's me back again. How are you enjoying the Egghead video? Of course we're not going to Egghead, we're going to Garp. Luckily, this was another episode that was already done before I started putting together this video, because, man, Egghead is just, it's so good, we don't deserve this. That aside though, Garp's entire story in this arc does bring up a very interesting trend. Sabaody saw Luffy's crew crushed, but Law and Kid sailed right into the new world. Egghead on the other hand, sees both Law and Kid crushed, but Luffy is kind of vibing. Later in Marineford, Luffy came flying out of the sky, but failed in his liberation of Ace. Now in Egghead, Garp comes flying out of the sky and succeeds in saving Koby, however, he is captured himself. Next is also Fishman Island, where Luffy meets an ancient weapon, so yeah, you know what, that's pretty bad. But I guess you could also say that it already happened with Sabo, since, you know, an ancient fire did kind of vaporize him. But yeah, what I'm saying here, and this could easily be another case of old monkey brain just seeing a pattern, but there is a weird number of parallels here, and I'm not exactly sure if it's just to emphasize that the Final Saga will be a lot more cutthroat, or maybe there is supposed to be something we're supposed to be reading into here. My gut does tell me that this is effectively Garp's death, even though he might not be dead. I think this is where his story ends. I think the important players here is actually Aokiji and Koby. This arc is just way too dense, so I'm not really going to get into this too much, but with what we see from Kizaru at the tail end of this arc, Aokiji's role also seems to be sort of in between allegiances and not really aligned with anyone. Back on Punk Hazard, we also got that scene of Aokiji, Smoker, and Doflamingo, where Aokiji just said, "It's still me." So I think with a lot of the events of Egghead and sort of the global pressure in the world slowly turning up, it is beginning to ask, what will happen to the admirals and how far will they actually go for the Marines and of course the world governments? In Marineford, yeah, he might not be an admiral, but we saw that with Garp. He literally said, "Hold me down or I will go nuts." Kizaru is also having a mental breakdown by the end of this arc and he ends up helping Luffy, and Aokiji here is now fighting his own mentor, so I do think that it is slowly moving all of the admirals toward their breaking points and eventually turning against the world governments. As for Koby though, I think this is swapping out a close friend to family. I think if Luffy heard that Koby has been captured, his reaction would sort of be, oh, he's strong and he's a marine, I'm sure he'll take care of himself. But with Garp, there is some of that, but this time, it is family, and he unfortunately has some very painful memories of that. We already saw how Luffy was very worried about learning what's going on with Vivi. So if he now learns that, once again, Blackbeard has captured his grandfather, well, I think we might be setting ourselves up for a Little God Valley incident where we see the pirates, aka Luffy, team up with the Marines, aka Koby, to bring down Zebek, aka the captain of the Saber of Zebek, Blackbeard. Also, I think an arc with the title of The War for Pirate Island, where Luffy eventually wins and is sort of crowned king of the pirates, it would just go incredibly hard. And imagine if all the world's strongest all descend on Pirate Island, and then Blackbeard does Black Hole Shadows Asgard. Well, suddenly, that is a big boss, and we might need everyone to fight that. Finally getting back to Egghead, we also finally begin to learn what might be the source of the devil fruits. Technically, all of this is of course just a theory from Vegapunk, but I think it makes a lot of sense. Essentially, the idea is that devil fruits are manifestations of the desires of humanity. And this is where I want to go on a slight tangent. One thing that I've always loved with all kinds of magic systems are prophecies, because people might misinterpret them or they might become self-fulfilling. Series like A Song of Ice and Fire have done this incredibly well, and that is what I always wanted One Piece to do as well. Apparently, my opinion in Wano was very controversial, but I really didn't like the fact that Luffy's devil fruit was, I'm not gonna say the retcon word, but I will say the retcon word, to essentially be a mythical zone rather than just a paramethea. And the thing is, I think Egghead actually does a much better job of really encompassing what I meant by that. If devil fruits are these manifestations of the desires of humanity, then yes, there would be a devil fruit which sort of represents freedom. But at the same time, freedom, it's not a defined thing, it's an abstract concept. Nika is the embodiment of that. It is the god of liberation, whatever liberation might mean. So it's not that I'm against the concept of this liberator and Luffy has his devil fruit, but rather that I don't think Luffy's devil fruit should have been the liberator devil fruit. And what I think illustrates that beautifully is everything we see with Kuma and him being referred to as the hands of liberation. In my mind, the concept of Nika, of the god of liberation, should never be bound to just one fruit. I believe anyone and any fruit could be Nika. Kuma could be Nika, I think Bonnie could be Nika, Luffy could be Nika. I just think this prophecy and humanity's collective yearning for this destined hero to liberate them should never be, like, just a single person. I don't think Nika existed. I think Joy Boy is just a manifestation of Nika, aka that desire for freedom. And in the same vein, I think Luffy is a manifestation of Nika for those same reasons, but I also think Kuma is the same thing. Big picture-wise, this changes absolutely nothing, and I know I'm just getting stuck on definitions, but I am still not a fan of the Gum Gum fruit becoming the, essentially well-defined, model Nika devil fruit. In my mind, and again, that is infinitely more true after we saw Kuma's story, it just doesn't really jive in my brain where we see someone like Kuma being referred to as the hands of liberation, but for some reason, the Nika devil fruit is already defined and it could never be Kuma. Okay, put a pin in that for now because we'll return to devil fruit discussions in just a little bit. In the midst of all the Among Us shenanigans, Lucci and Kaku of course pop off, which I don't think I've mentioned once, which I think illustrates just how insane this arc is, but yeah, all the fights here are absolutely breathtaking. The entire Zoro versus Mihawk Seraphim thing was like, oh my god, it's so good. One thing I do want to note though, and I think this will very much illustrate what happens when you move from the anime to the manga, and then I guess back to the anime, Luffy's Gear 5 here high-key makes me ask whether my read on it is completely wrong, or maybe the anime is just leaning a bit too far into it. Like, in my brain, Gear 5 is supposed to be wacky, goofy Toon Force, but this scene of him pounding his chest, it's terrifying! I can't blame Lucci for doing a double take. Luffy transforming is actually infinitely scarier than what I thought it was supposed to be on paper. Like, yeah, obviously Lucci gets beat around a bunch, which is, not good for Lucci, but still, the transformation itself, the chest pounding, that is so scary, like, bro actually said, yes, my name is Monkey. That is so spooky! But what is even spookier, and this is easily like the coolest thing in all of One Piece, is Planetfall, aka the arrival of all of the devils of Marie Joie. Immediate controversial opinion, I really don't like the official color schemes for them. In my brain, I imagine them as these horrifying monsters of darkness, but Oda's color scheme just kind of makes them look like colorful clowns. I'm not a big fan, I'm not gonna lie. That said though, the Dark Souls horse dude is like the coolest devil fruit user in all of One Piece, and frankly it's not even close. Okay, maybe Luffy has him beat, but he's so cool. There are so many cool fan arts of him, like Murphy's thumbnail artist, oh my god, he's gorgeous. I just think of him as like Arthas and Sindragosa, and he's so cool. But unfortunately, Oda's official color scheme doesn't really jive with that. I thought he was supposed to be like this cold, undead world type of dude, that's literally a Dark Souls boss, but fair enough. They are so cool! Okay, that said though, lock in, it is time to talk about theories, because their summoning circles are certainly something that we debated for a long time. First things first, they have the weird devil fruit whirly boys around them, but importantly, it is black, not like Luffy's, which is white. The reason I bring this up is because it looks like they have devil fruits, but the thing with their devil fruits is that they are literally numbered, and they are so similar and they can be summoned. So I don't think those are 5 separate devil fruits. I think it is a single devil fruit held by Emu. I think that summoning circle is Emu's devil fruit bringing them up from the underworld, kind of in the same way as we saw with Brook's supposed summoning circle, and also his soul being brought up from the underworld. If you think about the Straw Hats' separation arc, Brook's story in that still seems like the weirdest one out of the bunch, but there we had people worshipping a weird demon summoning circle thing, right? Well, suddenly, we have these guys literally being summoned by that demon circle. And number 2, and yes, I know I've talked about this like 100 times on the second channel, there's the weirdness around Brook's devil fruit and how it is explicitly said that his soul could not find its way back from the underworld because of the Florian Triangle fog. That seems to imply that souls work like light, aka when Blackbeard did his black blanket thingy, he could be blocking out all light so he could suck in souls. But okay, that's a separate tangent, let's not talk about that. And another point for that is that they are all connected telepathically, and another point for that is that Emu disenchants him. So we have dudes who have numbered forms who can summon each other, who can contact each other telepathically, and one of them can be disenchanted by someone above them? Yeah. I think this is Emu's devil fruit. I think they are kinda like Emu's satellites. And I think that then brings up a bunch of conversations around why their devil fruits have this black swirly boy, whereas Luffy's has white. Currently, I am landing on this, I don't want to call it a theory because it's not a theory, it's like an idea or a concept, but I think Luffy's devil fruit sort of has these white swirly boys because his ideology as a devil fruit user and his devil fruit completely align. They are pure white and they're untainted. Both their ideals align and is just the purest form of awakening a devil fruit. With these guys on the other hand, I think there is something far more literally darker going on and they've infused themselves with some kind of unnatural power. Essentially, I think their devil fruits and their bodies are not actually working hand in hand, if that makes sense. And another idea, completely out of left field, I actually think devil fruits might be an ancient lost technology. What I mean by that is, we just talked about that they are these manifestations of people's dreams, right? Well, if you had this pseudo-utopia that we hear of with infinitely more advanced technology, wouldn't the devil fruits, a thing that is literally curated for you and your desires and your problems, be like the pinnacle of that technology? And on the flip side, what do oppressive regimes not like? That's right, a miracle technology that could fulfill dreams, especially if those dreams involve freedom and liberation, aka the Nika devil fruits. It's not like this would be some mind-blowing reveal either. The Smile devil fruits were literally manufactured. So yes, I do think there is an angle of this world government trying to shut down this technology that could seemingly fulfill every single desire their people had. And then this war broke out because they were trying to suppress it, whereas people who wanted to use this miracle technology, well, they just labeled them devils and the fruits they ate were devil fruits. I know it's a completely undeveloped idea and I don't really know how it fits into the large scheme of things, but yes, I do think Emu is essentially a actual devil, bringing up other devils from the underworld, and all the elders are just his weird manifestations. Also, I don't think they have souls. Someone who definitely has a very, very sad soul is Kuma. Yes, it is time for us to finally get to his flashback. No. There are things about the God Valley incident that are a little bit sus, like maybe Rocks was not a bad guy after all. It is odd that Oda chose to write the directions they came from so explicitly, and it is Rocks who comes from the east, or, you know, the dawn. But okay, that's like purely speculation. I'm not entirely sure what Oda is going to do with the God Valley incident. I'm kinda torn between wanting it to remain a mystery because I think it's just cool not to have all the answers, but at the same time, obviously I want to know everything that happened here. But alright, that aside, let us talk about our precious little boy Kuma. I think there's a lot I could say, but I think the 3 little panels of him and his dad talking is basically all I need to show. His dad telling him that his mommy has passed away, but then just saying, isn't it wonderful? She's in a much better place now, as tears roll down his face. It's like, oh my god. And this came around Christmas too. This is not very Christmassy, Oda. Come on, man. And then all the talk about them talking about Nika, and suddenly the dude walks in and just shoots one of them, and we don't even see what happens. Kuma is just smiling and there's a splat on the wall. Oh my god. So many times in fiction, we have these tragic backstories of villains that allow us to understand how they became villains. And then there is Kuma. From the moment he was born, he has had every reason to become a villain. Everyone around him used him and abused him. His parents died a miserable death. All the times he was told about the liberator Nika who brought about happiness and freedom for everyone. But that Nika never arrived. At every turn in his life, things got objectively worse and worse and worse. But in spite of all of that, he never lost his soul. After the horrifying things that happened to Ginny, he adopts this little girl, and even though it is not his biological daughter, he tears himself quite literally limb from limb to protect her and to just cure her. The tragedy of Kuma is this person who is so full of love and so full of hope being turned into a cold machine. I think all of this is about showing us the true cruelty of the world government on an individual level. With fictional stories, there will always be an emotional disconnect between the characters we're following and the events that are actually unfolding, right? In the One Piece world, it's very easy to forget that we are following literal pirates. Luffy is one of the good ones, yes, but they are one in a million. These are pirates, and the Marines are actually kind of the good guys. And I think the same thing is true for the world governments. We know that they are pure evil on an abstract sense. I mean, we see them wipe out Leloucia, we see them wipe out entire populations, and so on. But big picture-wise, it's just that. We know that they're bad, and that's about it. Like, wow, they did another evil thing. Big surprise. With Kuma, on the other hand, all of that pain and all of that suffering is brought into focus with a single person. It's no longer about weird space lasers or things in the past. No, we see a father ripped away from his daughter. We see him fall apart. We see him sacrifice literally everything he ever had, all just to save this little girl. And even in the face of all of that, he never wanted revenge. He was never angry. He remained a pacifist. His single, deepest desire was just to wish Bonnie a very happy birthday. And after seeing that, let's be real, I think Kuma is a better person than all of us. We want to see the world government crash and burn. Also, I'm speaking personally to every single one of you like 2 years ago who left a comment on my Thriller Bark video. How do you not understand his powers and think he's a pacifist? When I read this as a teenager 10 years ago, see, I'm much smarter than you. I better understood what a pacifista was. Well, clearly you didn't. Leave that comment again. Please don't go after these comments, that's why I hid their names. But yes, this is your daily reminder that 1, you were all wrong. Number 2, never be snarky on the internet. Don't be a smartass. You never know when you're gonna be wrong. Oh wow, I understood it better when I was a teenager 10 years ago. Well, 10 years later, and I guess you're still just as dumb. Okay, sorry, that's too much. That's too much, I'm sorry. I'm still right though. Sorry. Speaking of being wrong though, I have a very, very big theory. So, you know how there's the weirdness around the circly eyes? Like Mihawk has one, Zunisha has one, and Emu has one. Emu seemingly is immortal, Zunisha is ancient. Why does Mihawk have circly eyes? Surprise, surprise, I bring you another batch of theories, this time supported by what we see with Kuma. One of the weirdest things around Kuma initially was him carrying around the Bible. After this flashback, we know that his church was in honor of Nika. And now knowing that, I started thinking back throughout the entire story. Do we ever see a cross in the context of religion? I don't think so, with the exception of Mihawk. So considering he looks like a vampire and he's the only warlord without a crew, could he like be a dude from the Void Century who once fought for Nika? Yeah, I've got no idea, but the Kuma flashback, oh my god, is beautiful. Returning to present day, Vegapunk announces that climate change is in fact real and that Emu's blasting is in fact raising the sea level. Also, I just realized I completely forgot to talk about Joy Boy being a pirate. Unless there is a Well of Mimir story on Elbaf and Luffy gives up his eye for some kind of knowledge, I think Joy Boy is going to be the pirate with the eye patch. Oda said that he's never drawn a pirate with an eye patch, and when we see it, it's probably going to signal the end of One Piece, so I think it's probably that. But yes, in terms of the water level rising, it does sort of reshape a few things you might have thought about Wano. For example, maybe the mountains were stretched up by a previous user of the Gomu Gomu. The ancient weapon is just chilling there, so, you know, it kind of makes sense. It also continues to bring up the question of why was Roger too early? Does the water level have to be at like a specific level? Again, maybe the One Piece, it's a drain. Once the water tips over and we open the drain, the continents will be revealed, and that will be the One Piece. It will be the entire world unified in one continent. There are actually multiple continents because continent puller, so that doesn't really make sense. And even outside of all of that, what is underneath Eni's lobby? What is in the middle of Long Ring Longland that it had these very weirdly shaped mountains, almost like a crown? Whatever the case, I guess we now have the explanation for the Tequila Wolf Bridge. That is a bridge that they built anticipating that the world would be sunk and all Devil Fruit users would be dead. Which, by the way, again feeds into my theory of the world government just wanting to wipe out all Devil Fruits because they're just too good. And the final thing we need to talk about, and I don't know how this happened, we are going so fast, we are zooming past so many details, but we're already like at an hour. We have to talk about the bazooka finally going off with Emet waking up. The biggest questions here, I think, is why did it storm Marie Joie, and is it storming Marie Joie in some way connected to Zunisha's crimes? I don't really think so, because Robin mentions that 200 years ago was also the year discrimination against fishmen became a real issue. So did Joy Boy somehow leave behind this message of whenever you see oppression, you wake up and you go ham, but it ran out of energy? Or maybe, because of the discrimination against fishmen, the drums of liberation sounded, sort of in an abstract sense. They hoped for a liberator, they hoped for Nika. And so, the Devil Fruit was manifested somewhere, and during that drums of liberation period, for just a brief moment, Emet might have been searching for that Devil Fruit. In this arc, we also saw Kuma climbing the red line. But he never wanted anything atop the red line, he was just trying to get to Bonnie. So maybe what happened 200 years ago was just Emet going toward the formation of the Gum Gum Fruits. Not entirely certain, but what I feel a bit more certain about is that the knot we see here will be very important. Well, not this exact knot, but you get what I mean. In a symbolic sense, I think, you know, a knot, number one, piratey stuff, number two, it's like tying the knot, we're gonna be like unified forever. But in a purely practical sense, this is essentially introduced ancient artifacts that could be hockey nukes. What if every fiber of the Straw Hat in Marie Joie has been infused with ancient hockey? What if every strand in Luffy's Straw Hat has been infused with hockey? What I'm getting at here is that hockey-infused swords are no longer the only thing we should be thinking about. Anything could be holding on to vast amounts of ancient hockey. Considering we're headed for Elbaf, which has a very rich history, I think that might be a little bit important. And with that, that is the Egghead arc. There will be no preamble here. This is going straight into the S tier. There are a few things throughout the arc that I already mentioned, like with the Vegapunks and stuff, that I wasn't the biggest fan of, but still, the peaks of this arc, and like I said, a lot of these sort of in-the-world scenes, they do make me worried about how long One Piece will really be, and whether or not we're ever going to see the end of it. But I think this arc was basically everything that I wanted from, like, the first introduction to the true endgame of One Piece. It does feel like Oda is finally leveraging this entire 20-year-long backlog that he has to truly tell this grander-than-life story where suddenly everything seems to be cascading towards a very climactic conclusion. We've got the ancient weapons making their moves, we've got all the powerful forces in the world making their moves. This, to me, feels like we are back on Zou and learning of the Road Poneglyph for the first time. I can see the end of the story right now, and that makes me so excited. And that's not to mention, again, Kuma's story, which I do think could easily be up there with the best flashbacks. And that's not even to talk about Buggy's story, right? I think this arc, to sort of explore another angle to what I said of Oda leveraging this story, it is true that we see all these big forces moving, but I think another avenue of that is Oda now using these different characters, right? There's a reason why I mean about the fact that a lot of Egghead is not actually about Egghead. It's about a lot of other characters. And we feel for all of those characters. When I saw Koby's honesty impact, which I didn't talk about, but yes, it feels so rewarding. Again, I've always thought that Koby and Luffy would be natural counterweights to each other. And now, again, seeing those parallels to Roger and Garp, I can see where this is going. And that feels so rewarding that after all this time, I might not have been caught up for a long time, but I feel nostalgic for where I once was. That is how truly monumental the story has felt, and to finally enter its true endgame. This is easily the best introductory arc that I think we've had in One Piece, and I cannot wait to see what Oda does with Elbaf, which I suppose is going to be like the big first sort of actual climactic arc in this new story. So yes, let me know what you thought about Egghead, I guess. Anyway, enough yapping. If you want to hear all of my takes with everything to do with One Piece, I talk about One Piece all the time on the second channel, so give that a look. Now I'll pass it on over to outro Koroto. Bye. And that's the video. 2 back-to-back 1-hour videos on the main channel is way too much. So with that, I just want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest member of the team, Jordan Nunn? I'm not sure. But without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my ramblings, so seriously, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!